Good afternoon. I know we have many people joining us. Thank you guys so much for being here. My name is Tawan Wilson. I have the pleasure of serving as your Associate Vice President for Inclusive Excellence and Chief Diversity Officer here at Georgia Southern University. And we are just so happy and thrilled that you guys are coming into the room as we engage in a conversation this afternoon around racial battle fatigue. We know that the recent months, years, days have been challenging for many of us as we've navigated campus life, as we've navigated life in general. And I'm just so grateful to Dr. Mika Williams-Johnson from the College of Education, who reached out and had this amazing idea to facilitate this incredible workshop this afternoon. And so Dr. Williams-Johnson, thank you so much for your leadership and your hard work here at the university. We are, again, just trying to buy a little time to let a few more people come into the room here before we continue. And in about 15 seconds, we will transition the meeting. Okay. All right. So again, good afternoon. It is my distinct honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Elizabeth Denway-Kola. Dr. Denway-Kola is an associate professor in the Department of Communication Arts, College of Arts and Humanities, and she is the 2019-2020 recipient of the Faculty Openness and Inclusion Award. And so we're so thankful for her leadership as well. Thank you for being with us. She will take it from here, and I will be quiet. Feel free to jump in, Liz.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wilson. And I want to give a formal greeting to everybody who is privileged to be a part of this Zoom experience. And this, of course, is coming to you from Georgia Southern University, all of the campuses, which includes our campus in Statesboro, our campus in Armstrong, of which I am a part, in Savannah, and of course our Liberty campus, which is in Hinesville. And so what I want to do is just tell you a little bit about how this is going to work. And the first thing you need to know for all of the participants is that I'm going to introduce our panelists are going to be introduced by Tierney Thurman. And we're also going to have, of course, the bulk of our program is going to be the discussions from our esteemed panelists who will be introduced shortly by Tierney. And we will also have a time for you to participate, which will be questions from the audience, which will be facilitated by Valencia Muldrow and Tierney Thurman. Now, one of the ways that you can participate is audience members can submit your questions via chat. You simply have to enter your name, affiliation with the university, whether you're staff, student, faculty, or alum, and the questions for the panel. Now, if you have a specific question for a panel member, that should be included as well. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Tierney. And again, welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tierney Thurman, a graduate from the counselor education program with an emphasis in clinical mental health. I graduated in 2014 from Georgia Southern. I'm also the owner of Adulthood Counseling and Consulting, which is centered here in Baltimore, Maryland. I'm honored to welcome our panelists for this much needed conversation on racial battle fatigue. And our first panelist this afternoon is Ms. Lutricia Collier. Ms. Collier has a long career as an activist, way before becoming a licensed counselor, beginning when she was only 14 years old as a member of the Roy Wilkins Youth Council of the NAACP. She was trained in nonviolent civil disobedience, where she, along with other members of the Youth Council, participated in weeks of nonviolent protest and were successful in integrating all public facilities in her hometown of Spartanburg, South Carolina. Ms. Collier is the owner of the Center for Healing and Wellness, a state-certified agency in South Carolina. There she uses several approaches in working with clients as she introduces and promotes strategies to overcoming feelings of oppression and bigotries that have separated all of us. She is the author of Soul Lost and Found, From Fear and Alienation to Wholeness, and Unity, and the companion manual, Soulful Conversations. Our next panelist, Dr. William Bill Cross. Dr. Cross is a theorist and researcher in the field of psychology, specifically Black identity development. Expanding over his 50-year career, Cross has transformed racial and ethnic identity research by examining the science of our psychological need for liberation under conditions of oppression. Cross's scholarship has debunked theories of Negro self-hatred, the cross-racial identity scale, and his text, Shades of Black, Diversity, and African American Identity, provided a framework for both individual and collective social change and became one of the most influential contributors to the field. Shades has been referenced in every major textbook or journal articles on Black consciousness, psychology, and identity development. Cross is a professor emeritus of psychology at the University of Denver. Our next panelist is Dr. Leon Spencer. Dr. Leon Spencer is a professor emeritus of counselor education at Georgia Southern University. He is presently in private practice at Counseling Associates of Statesboro, Georgia. Dr. Spencer is a certified professional counselor supervisor and has worked for 6 years as a military family life counselor. He's retired military and served in the Air Force as a social action superintendent specializing in family support, drug and alcohol rehabilitation, equal opportunity and treatment, and race relations. He has extensive work and research focused on multicultural systemic issues, counseling, and anti-oppression. He developed the first cross-cultural graduate course in counselor education at Georgia Southern and is the founder of the Southeastern Cross-Cultural Conference that is currently in its 20th year. Our next panelist is Dr. Mathus Stewart. 15 years of her career, Dr. Stewart served in schools as a teacher, counselor, and school psychologist in Ohio public schools. The remaining years, Dr. Stewart devoted much of her time in various academic positions in higher education, including an administrative post in the Desegregation Center at Kent State University dedicated to race and education. Dr. Stewart is a retired professor of counselor education at Georgia Southern University. Dr. Stewart continues to contribute to the community through various organizations and lives in Savannah, Georgia. Our final panelist is Ms. Constance Wallace. Ms. Wallace is a licensed professional counselor and owner of Positive Outlook Group, LLC in Augusta, Georgia. She holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from Spelman College, a master's degree in professional counseling from Georgia State University, and has worked as a mental health therapist for 15 years. Ms. Wallace is an advocate for equality and has dedicated her career to providing support to those impacted by various types of trauma, especially youth and young professionals. She is a highly sought after speaker for organizations and institutions seeking to navigate the emotional labor of social justice and racial trauma. In addition to her work within her private practice, Ms. Wallace previously served as the state chair of communications, press, and publicity for the Georgia NAACP, of course, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our panelists. We're so honored to have them today, and we look forward to this conversation. Thank you.
It is difficult to imagine finding some resolution or healing when discussing blatant police violence and discourse on race. It is so intense and emotionally charged. The racial trauma has a long history, and we are tired and frustrated. The goal of this session is to focus our attention on healing from the wounds of the past, building mutually respectful relationships across racial and ethnic lines that honor and value each person's humanity, and creating intergenerational and diverse community relationships that better reflect our common humanity. In other words, how can healing begin in these tumultuous times? Each of our panelists will share their thoughts on racial battle fatigue and healing in 6 to 8 minutes each. We will have time for questions following their discussion. We will move through the panel in the order they were introduced. Our first therapist is Ms. Lucretia Calere.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation and to have it in the company and the presence of the people on this panel, and also those who are have joined us in this experience. So I started my work as an anti-racism activist at the age of 14. And so I've seen much in my life that has been causes of pressure and stress. And I want to just sort of make the difference between pressure, because I think we're all under pressure. If you're an African American in this country, you're under pressure. The question becomes the extent to which that pressure turns into stress. And usually the pressure turns into stress when you don't have good coping strategies for dealing with pressure. So in my life, I have had the experience of watching over time, and I want to specifically address the issue of the killing of innocent Black and brown people. For me, I remember Emmett Till, and I think that was my first experience in understanding what the color of my skin meant in a racialized or white supremacist culture. And it was a difficult experience because at the age of 8 or 9, it terrified me because I felt on some level that I was not in control of my situation as a 9-year-old. The thing that drew me to the civil rights movement was coming to the awareness that there is something I can do. I could go and participate in the sit-in demonstrations. I could go and picket in front of racist public facilities. I could go and I could participate in understanding what the Indian term is, Satyagraha. What Dr. King called it was nonviolent social disobedience. I could do that. And it was in that ability to recognize what I can do that offered me some relief from what I think I would have experienced, which is a lot of pressure and a lot of stress, looking at my situation as a young African-American person in racist South Carolina, which is probably the most, I don't know if it's the most conservative. I think every state, every county in South Carolina is conservative, but at least I found a way to get it to address what I saw as an obvious injustice. So the first thing it took for me was to recognize that whatever is going on is not right. It's not acceptable. It's not the way it should be. Rather than internalizing it and believing that there was something wrong with me. And I have my parents, particularly my dad, to thank for that, because he would just say as a mantra almost, you can do anything you want to do. There's nothing you can't do. Nothing can stop you. And what that led me to know is that the choices were mine. Regardless of the obstacles that I faced, the resistance that was in front of me, at the end of the day, I had some choice about how I would conduct myself. So the sense of efficacy, which means to me that when all is said and done, I am a human being and I am a good one. And I have some choice about my situation. That awareness, that sense of my own sense of self and my own internal goodness helped me resolve, or at least understand what was in front of me, and to put the blame where it belonged, which was white supremacy and not me. And that singular awareness as a young person is what guided my life from then on. So the other part of that, though, was I came to the civil rights movement and the words of Dr. King. And Dr. King, even in the expression of nonviolent civil disobedience, it was a statement that I am somebody and I can choose whether or not I am willing to participate in an unjust law. And I can do that non-violently. It's a choice I make to not become the thing I hate. I might disagree with you. I may not, I will, but I might think that your laws are unjust. I'm choosing not to participate. Or if I must participate, which in a society that is controlled by, white people, where we live, our jobs, the doctors, healthcare, everything is dependent upon a white supremacist system, then the question becomes nonviolent civil disobedience. But it also becomes understanding where it is that you participate in unjust systems and where it is you resist. But all along, the key for me is the recognition that whether I need to participate or not, whether I need to participate because my survival requires it, I know who I am. And it's that basic foundation of knowing who you are and believing in your essential efficacy and goodness as a human being, mustering all of your skills and your talents and your abilities to become exactly who you want to be, not ever losing sight of that, which has helped me with the pressure, yes, indeed, the stresses I have met over time. So I've worked in, school systems that were racist. I've worked in college systems that were racist. I've worked in state government that clearly had a white supremacist construct. I've had to deal with people who were outwardly, unabashedly, clear-eyed racist, and they said so. And I have experienced the results of that, the discrimination, being locked out, being overlooked. And of course, all of those they are painful, and it creates the pressure that you feel as you try to get along in a world that has decided that it does not like you. What it brings me to, in my understanding now as I've moved along, and I have to say, I appreciate Dr. Cross's take on this, because the assumption that somehow or other we get beaten down because we have that experience is not necessarily true. There is a way in which you gain strength and you gain competence and you gain perspective and you gain wisdom from the struggle that you face. The beauty of this for us as a people, in my opinion, is that we have the capacity to come together. Our community serves us. Our churches serve us. Our families serve us. Our next door neighbors. We are a close-knit community. We depend on each other and we help each other, and when necessary, we save each other. The sadness that I feel right now at this point in my life is that we on some level have lost sight of that as a part of our community. And I don't know what that's about. I'm still trying to understand it. But the closeness and the close community that I experienced as a child growing up, which meant to me that whatever happened outside in my life, outside in white world, I knew I had a community and I had a family and I had a church that I could come back to. And that's another thing that saved me. So,
and can I'd like to just interject something just for the sake of group time and the points that you make. When you talk about and maybe your other colleagues might touch on this as well, when you talk about real time, how you went from your life to experiencing the pain, the fear of an Emmett Till situation happening in your life versus today, real time, there's still sadness and there's still prejudice that happens in your life. And, we do have these organizations that help us, like churches and all the rest of that. But it almost sounds like we're still working on some type of remedy to be able to deal with these social ills. So going to our next speaker, Dr. Cross, I'm not sure what your take is on that. You may have a different take, but we'd like to go ahead and hear from you at this point and see what you would like to say. Dr. Cross.
Here we go. Mic's on. Okay, so when we're talking about racial fatigue, we're essentially about stress. And we're talking about stress that can affect you just because you're living while Black, especially around diabetes and heart concerns. So even if you don't feel it, sometimes in a sense, just living your life and going through the things you go through can cause it to become a part of your body. So for us, across the panelists, we're going to give you some ideas on things you can, not so much you can't control racism, but you can better control your body. So for example, you want to have a good relationship with your primary doctor. You want to have someone who you trust and who can give you feedback about issues of blood pressure and diabetes and so on. You're going to find some people talking about diet. Yes, diet can have an influence in how you adjust. Daily exercise, and of course, nurturing a sense of spirituality. I want to focus on the end of the day. Whatever you do, if you've made love, if you've had a wonderful body massage, you've listened to jazz, you want to end up preserving at least 1 hour and no less than 1/2 hour before you hit the sack. And that must mean turning off the television, if you can, meditating for a while. I even keep a journal. And you don't have to write a whole book. In some cases, you can just write a word that captures something that happened to you today that you can think about. I find also at the end of the day that if I send a text message to a loved one, just receiving back a message that says, hey, you're okay, it really can feel good. The point is to really kind of wind down so that when you finally reach the point of sleeping, you minimize the chance that you're taking some stress into that other period of your life. Besides turning off the television, especially if you have a partner, not some of you are single, okay, doing things with the partner can be critical. So for example, if you were to spread a blanket or something on the floor, get into kind of like a yoga-like position, and not necessarily talk to each other, but maybe just place your hands with each other so that you can feel each other's essence. That can be very helpful in toning down. But it's critical that you just make it a habit that before you hit the sack, you have done some things to let your body know that you're winding down, that you're preserving some of your energy for sleep. Some of these things sound simple. Some of my other colleagues will give you other techniques that you can use, but they add up, and they're going to, in fact, occupy your whole day. So, for example, I woke up this morning. First thing I did was to weigh myself because I'm trying to lose some weight. 2-mile walk back here. During the day, in a sense, I will be conscious again of some of the things that I'm doing, especially around my diet, making sure I really am dealing with salt and sugar. And as I've said, going into the end of the day, winding down and finding ways in which I connect with a sense of spirituality and the more essence part of who I am. This is not only with regard to your Blackness, it's with regard to everything, because some of you relate to issues of being Blackness, some of you relate to being religious. All these things can assist you in helping you control the body. You won't be able to eliminate the stress. That's why I mentioned that you want to have a good relationship with your primary doctor. But it can assist, it can help. So those are my thoughts this morning about some of the things that you can do, and my colleagues will add to it, so that you'll end up with almost like a Christmas tree of presents that we're trying to present to you.
Thank you, Dr. Cross. I wonder, when people think about dealing with stress and other issues, most people think about the mental aspect of it. And I really
Yes.
think that what you told us about the physical aspect is equally important. I especially like, as a communicator, the fact that you talked about being able to keep a journal. I think a lot of people have a fear of keeping a journal because they think you have to write all these wonderful things. And I find it
That's fine.
fascinating that you said that you can merely write a word because a
Just
word
write a word.
will give you a thought. So
Because
thank you.
in a sense, you're stopping yourself and you're just focusing for that moment, say on the word or the thoughts. It's another way to distract you from some of the stress that you may be experiencing. But thank you.
Thank you. And next we're going to hear from Dr. Spencer.
Wow, thank you. I've been carrying this book around since graduate school, Dr. Cross. I've known you for, God, I don't know how many years, maybe 25. I've known you all my professional life because I know you before I met you. And it's funny, I found it last night and I said, well, I'll bring this to him and let him sign it. That's not going to happen. But hopefully when we see you again or we see each other again, it will. I struggle with where to start. Storytelling is important. And storytelling has always been rich for me from a family and from a cultural point of view. There were multiple stories. But I read something, and I'm going to start there, and it's by Mickey Scott, Bay Jones. And it talks about, I think, something that if we are dealing with groups and individuals around oppression, racism, that it's an important piece to sort of look at, and that is that together we create brave space, because there's no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars and we have all caused wounds in this space. We seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify the voices that fight to be heard everywhere. We have the right to start somewhere and to continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think. No, we will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. I will not always be what we wish it to be. It will be our brave space together that will work on it side by side. I really don't know quite where to begin in talking about racial battle fatigue. The irony is perhaps talking about it puts it in a brave container, and that might be useful. I did not say safe container because I'm not really sure what safety is. Racial battle fatigue, and this is what many of you know, really was by critical race theorist William Smith, who started to use with African American men and then expanded to describe the negative and racially charged experiences of all people of color in the United States. How many racially charged experiences do you know that occurred involving people of color this year? Think about it. This week, or even today, how many? Battle fatigue is really that cumulative kind of effect that happens. It's the cumulative race-related stress and the responding to distressing mental and emotional conditions. They emerge constantly as dismissive, demeaning, insensitive, hostile, racial environment. My wife reminded me this morning that I've been to Georgia Southern, or I've been in Statesboro for 26 years. That's longer than my time in the Air Force. But there's some real similarities in the systems. Very much. The common kind of microaggressions that are really present when you start to talk about racial battle fatigue. You're not Black. Are you really Black? You're not Latino. You must have something else in you. Welcome to the university. We're glad to have you. You can teach a multicultural counseling class. My specialty at that time was family and addiction counseling with certification. The list goes on and it goes on, and you work through it and you struggle through it, and you find what I call a safe haven. You find a haven, and I look at the havens, I look for three people. Sometimes someone said it looks like the unholy trinity. No, not really. It is a safe space. You're not floating out there by yourself. We know that battle fatigue stems from racism and microaggression. We know that people of color experience this institutionally, and we're constantly the subject. I believe that we look at events that shape us. We look at history when we're doing therapy. And then we consider actions as to how we can develop and move into something that's more whole. I did a little struggling this morning. And the little struggling was about whether I would share something or not. And maybe I lost it because I didn't want to share it. But I really do. In a sense, what I want to put up as an example when you look to trauma. 3 13-year-old Black boys who got permission to visit a ship that was docked in the Savannah Harbor. We called it the Nautilus, but I think we may have made that up later. We were excited. We went. We had a great day. We had the experience of seeing 2 Black sailors. They smiled. They made sure that we were safe. At least that's what I think in hindsight. We felt great. We felt playful. We felt 13. Many of you are familiar with Savannah. We walked through a square in Savannah dressed in our shared Boy Scout uniforms. When I say that, George had the shirt, I had the belt, Robert had, I don't know, but Robert had something. But we didn't have a full Scout uniform. Suddenly, we see flashing lights and a police car behind us. In those days, there were some squares in Savannah that emergency vehicles could drive through, and they were driving through. And our first response was to run, run, run. We ended up blocked in a courtyard with a barking dog, 2 white policemen who demanded that we turn over the gun. We said, "What gun?" And says, "Don't talk back to me. We saw you with the gun." "No, sir. We had a hiking stick." "Don't call me a liar," said the men looking at us. "We are scared." Robert and I are speechless. The dog is barking louder. We are scared when we see our friend George reach into his shirt pocket and he pulls out, guess what? His Boy Scout card and announce, "My name is George Washington, and we are Boy Scouts of America."
That's a powerful story there, and kind of it leads back into apparently we learned some of these things about discrimination and fear so early as children, and they have obviously have a great impact and stamp on who we are and who we become today. Your points that you made about battle fatigue and you being in the military are especially poignant. I'm retired military Air Force as well. And knowing that it's not just a happenstance that people have these issues regarding the fatigue, it is a deep-seated type of thing, as you so gratefully and eloquently illustrated. And it actually brings about a lot of pain and suffering. And the 2 stories that you told, and you're a great storyteller, by the way, illustrates the importance of us dealing with racial battle fatigue and how we deal with it. And at whatever age we're at, having to deal with it, it's really important. So I thank you for sharing that as well. Now we're going to have Dr. Stewart. Want to make sure that you have time to share.
I really am taking in all of the storytelling and all of the advice and thinking about my life and where I am today. And there's so many intersections of what I'm hearing and parallels. I'd like to highlight who I am in terms of the conversation, and I don't know whether you're there or not. I'm not, we talk about intergenerational, and I talk about it both from intergenerational and also from the development perspective of life, developmental stages of life. And because I was one of the babies born after migration to the North, and I was born late, all my cousins were adults by the time I was born. So they had stopped talking about the trauma. And they moved lots of different places before they finally settled in Ohio. They moved from Illinois, they moved to Colorado, they moved back to Illinois, back to Ohio. And the story that I found out about that was through the census. They never talked about it. So, but what I did experience is how they began to take care of themselves in those moments. And the one thing that stands out for me is I grew up in a small industrial town that was formed at the turn of the century when they were going from agriculture to industry. And it was predominantly white and immigrants from Europe and a few of us Black folks. The thing that connected us was that it was a small town, and it became my understanding of it and feeling of it. It was more class than it was race because there weren't that many Black folks there. And we all hung out with the immigrants. As we were talking the other night, countries that don't even exist anymore, you know, Slovaks and Hungarians and Italians. So I grew up with that sense of expectation of becoming someone, that we could learn, we could get what we wanted to get. And the messaging came to me by virtue of my grandmother, who said 3 things that I carry with me through any theory or any kind of preparation. Don't let anybody take your own knowing. That's the power of knowledge. The other one is, she said, of all your mama's children, love yourself the best. That's for me the power of knowing I have regard, that whatever I know, I have to protect it and keep working on it till the truths are my truths. And part of that was what they showed me when we looked at what were the things in the system that we were not a part of and how we took care of it. And one of them, which is such a thing of today, was voting. And my grandmother could not read. She could write her name. And I remember when she got to do her first voting, and I think it was probably around the president of, not the first term, but maybe the second term or so, of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And she took me with her so I could stand on a stool and help her mark her X and read it. She was so determined to know that there was a power of her own knowing that was going on a piece of paper and was going to affect something. I take that further, and I got older. If you all know Kimberly Crenshaw, her grandfather was the titan in our next town community who went to bat for Black oppression every time somebody said, Dr. Williams, this just happened. And it was up close and personal to understand that and see that happen. In high school and grade school, I got excluded from a project that I didn't know why I got excluded, but it was a production that we were going to sing. And my mother, this is the sense of agency that I experienced. I went home and told her, I said, I had all my life worked to get in the 4th grade and be in this play. And I went home and told my mother I didn't get in it. And she was my advocate. She said, and she asked a question, why aren't you in the play? I don't know. She said, what did the teacher say? I said, I don't know. She said, go find out why you're not in the play. So I went and asked with that. I said, why am I? Well, I'm not. My mama wants to know why I'm not in the play. She said, because you don't sing well enough. Well, my mama took her apron on, put her hat on, and went up to meet with the teacher. So the teacher said, no, these are white teachers. No, Patty doesn't sing well enough. She said, what about the rest of the girls? Did they take voice lessons? And the teacher looked so stunned. She said, no. She said, well, then she can be in there, because if you don't want her to sing, she can mouth the words, but she can be in there and be an angel. And that kind of agency followed me. And the other part of it was, we were the only people in town that had a house with 3 or 4 bedrooms, and we all lived in it, but there was always a bedroom that we could let out to some Black man predominantly who came to town as a person of power in town. The first Urban League person that ever came to that town lived with us. That's where I got to see what the academy looked like. I didn't know that's what it was. The first metallurgist in Ohio came and lived with us because they didn't have anywhere else to live at that time. So that set the tone for me to know why I'm going to college. I didn't even know there were HBCUs. And my cousin said, because she'd gone to school in Richmond, you need to go to an HBCU. And I wanted to major in something, and there I was at Virginia State. My very first convocation was one of, and then I grew up in the church where James Lawson's father was pastor. So you can imagine with someone of that caliber raising a family of 9 kids, and you lived with them and watched it. That for me was my introduction to what it means to be peaceful, powerful, and protesting. My first step was to go to convocation, the governor of Virginia came in and he said his speech and he used the word negra. And I looked up and people were walking out. Well, the student body, president and frat people had had enough of it, and they had decided the next time he came and he said that word, we were going out in protest. I didn't know, I walked out with him. So what I want to say is, I'm listening to what people have said, is your life right now, and when you talk about real time, look in your life right now in real time, and how have people created a sense of belonging for you? Because that's part of a healing process. I must belong. And I must belong under that mantra that, if you remember when we used to say, I'm okay, you're okay, that it isn't that we all have a right to live together and be okay. So as I look at what goes on in the academy now and what you're facing as on campuses, one of the things I read last night surprised me was a student who was attacked in University of Arizona. And I thought that could have been my grandson, that could be anybody at Georgia Southern. And he was attacked by three white men, let me say that. And he didn't know what to do with it. And it was so distressful and stunning to him that only thing he could say was, I don't think it was racial, and I don't want to talk about it. So when I hear Dr. Spencer and when I hear Dr. Cross talking about things to do on your own, even if you don't know what to write, one of the best ways to write is just settle out, write down everything that's on your mind at that time. Just write it, a stream of thoughts. So you get rid of it, you empty it. And then you put it aside and say, now I'm through with that. How can I settle my heartbeat? How can I settle my mouth? And get up the next morning and say to yourself, how am I going to love myself this morning? And that to me is what we talk about, self-regard. And Toni Morrison has done such a wonderful thing with that in her last book. The source of self-regard is in you.
And I think that's a really
It's in us.
important issue when you're
And the
talking
one
about
thing
being
about
yourself.
the body that I just want to close with this.
Okay, cool.
Every bone in our body is capable of acting on that.
Oh, wow, that's a really powerful statement. You know, and it's interesting how everybody's so far gone to the mental aspect of using their stories and your words, and then you talk about a sense of agency. I especially like the don't let anyone take your own knowing. It's about knowing who you are and being able to develop that and being able to be proud of it, regardless of the situations that are coming on, and to be able to build yourself. So that was really revelatory there, Dr. Stewart. I appreciate that. And now we're going to hear from Ms. Constance Wallace.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for welcoming me and inviting me to be a part of this very important conversation. When I reflect on the historical context of racial trauma and racial battle fatigue in this nation, I have to reflect on my father. My late father, Homer Wallace, was a civil rights activist and leader and a co-founder of the Effingham County branch of the Georgia NAACP. And so right down the street from Georgia Southern in Effingham County. And when I reflect on the fact that he and others founded the Effingham branch in the very same year that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, I can't begin to imagine the racial trauma and the racial battle fatigue that they experienced. The worry about what would happen when that branch was formed out of concern for what those who had no interest in racial justice would do to try to shut it down. As a licensed professional counselor, I've worked with trauma my entire career, be it with survivors of domestic violence, survivors of sexual trauma, and working with individuals who've experienced police brutality, racial profiling from the police. They've experienced their symptoms of trauma are the same. Their stress response is the same. And so I'm very thankful that Georgia Southern has put this on to acknowledge that this is traumatic for individuals. The images that we've seen, the stories that we've heard continuously back to back, this is a form of trauma. And when I've worked with those individuals who've experienced racial trauma, police brutality, profiling, they've expressed the same symptoms: the difficulty sleeping at night, the change in appetite, anxiety, all of those symptoms, they are the same. And I've also had the experience of working with student actors at Spelman and Morehouse when they worked together to put on they did a project called the Georgia Incarceration Performance Project, where they researched the history of incarceration in Georgia. And while working with them, they shared the traumatic responses that they had with learning that history, with learning the history of how especially Black individuals were treated, Black men, Black women were treated when they were incarcerated in this state. And what was important for them as part of healing and dealing with the traumatic responses they had was feeling heard and being seen. The concern that I've had is that sometimes it's normalized, seeing and hearing the violence and the level of trauma and discrimination that is going on in this country. It has been normalized as, okay, that's another story on the news. But there is significant trauma that many experience when they see that over and over and over again. And so part of healing is being seen, being heard, and it being identified as what it is, very traumatic, and being able to work through that. Outside of being a therapist, I'm a Black woman. And for me, especially with the continuous story, what felt like, well, not just what felt like, what was the back-to-back reporting of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd, their murders, that was very triggering for me as a therapist. And part of my healing was joining a racial support group for Black therapists. And that is a significant part of healing, by having those spaces, safe spaces where you can talk to others and share, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm experiencing, and having that support from others to help guide you as you go through. And then also what I have found to be helpful, there is a meditation by Dr. Candace Nicole, and it's called Black Lives Matter Meditation. And it is a reminder that your life matters. And it's also a reminder, it's part of that meditation, is you are not a representation of an entire race. You are a representation of yourself. And so be it if you need to listen to meditations on part of your waking up routine or getting ready for bed, taking some time to separate from the information that you're hearing on a regular basis, finding individuals, whether it's friends, family, colleagues, that you can talk to and share your feelings. So all of those are really key to your healing, and acknowledging that what you're feeling is real, and it is, you can talk to other people about it. And that is some of the things that I feel are important to the process of healing and dealing with racial battle fatigue and racial trauma. I believe you're still on mute, Liz. I can't hear you.
We can't hear you, Liz.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
That's a very famous question, by the way. I'm especially gratified to have listened to all of the speakers talk about the aspect of healing and healing in the midst of challenges. You talked about the fact that, not only do we have to look at our mental healing, but we have to look at the fact that we can't represent everybody. We can't carry everybody. And I thought that was especially poignant that you talked about that. So, from the very first presentation, we learned that in real time during the Emmett Till situation, that there was fear in the community, and even though we are in the 21st century, that fear has not totally abated. So we have to look at things like being able to not only deal with our mental fear, but also deal with taking care of our bodies. Several of our panelists mentioned that, being able to take care of our bodies. How do you do that? Tell your stories, know your stories, believe in your stories, have a sense of agency. Don't let anyone take away your own knowing. Empower yourself. I've heard that several times today. And at the end of the day, we still realize that the aspect of racial battle fatigue is a real thing. And you have to find within yourself, whoever you are, the ability to be able to find your particular healing balm to make yourself that person who will be able to meet the needs of others, meet the needs of yourself, and at the end of the day, be able to walk in healing. So at this time, I thank the panelists, by the way, just for an excellent job. At this time, we're going to hear from the audience. And for those of you who are out there who have questions, what we would like you to do is send us your questions. And what will happen is Valencia Muldrow and Tyranny, who I introduced earlier, will deliver the questions to the panel. And Valencia will go first, then Tyranny. You're not going to be able to see the questions as the audience on the chat, only the panelists will see them, but they will endeavor to answer your questions to the best of their ability. And I'm just confident that they'll be able to do that. So I've turned it over to you, Valencia.
Great, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. I just wanted to briefly introduce myself. I'm Valencia Muldrow, the Administrative Coordinator for the Office of Inclusive Excellence, and also a double eagle. So it's just been truly a pleasure, of course, to see our emeritus professors who are with us, as well as to observe the panelists. So the first question is a little bit long, so I'm going to read it, and then if you would like me to repeat the question, please let me know. This is from Professor Stephanie Sipe. I'm here with the students for my employment law and legislative compliance course. What I hear the speakers address is a world with which most 18 to 22-year-olds are unaware of, including many of my students of color, because of their experience growing up in an assumed meritocracy. For people who have not experienced racial battle fatigue because of age or because we are not persons of color, how can we be allies to persons experiencing racial battle fatigue, especially as we work with or manage persons of color? and this was addressed to the general panel.
Dr. Cross, you're on mute.
There we go. There we go. This may sound a little odd, but the racism that we experience causes us to see each other as tribes. And there's got to be a way in which you understand that we are born first as human, and that we go through a process of education. And some of us become racist, some become the target of racists. But if you start to dehumanize the persons who you think are hurting you, that's a real loss. And that means trying to figure out, I mean, Baldwin said it, we have to find a way to forgive people of their hatred. I'm 80 years old and I don't know how I've done it, but I have found a way not to hate. And it's given me a clear mind to do a clear analytic understanding of the forces that are here. It's critical for those people who are white or those Black people who are not particularly aware. Then you have to read and become informed. There's no other way to get around it. There's no way in which you can explain that most white people spend 75% of their time sharing with other white people, and that figure for Black people is about 65% of the time. You can't get that segregation without forces causing things to happen in housing, in education, and so on. And you have to take the time to become informed, because you can't do anything about the problem if you don't have much knowledge about it.
Pat Stewart, Patricia Stewart here. I appreciate that, Dr. Cross, because I found a term yesterday that helps me understand what they ask, and that is, it came from Kendi's book and his conversation about it. And he named a kind of person who wants to be a concerned ally. But you got to be curious. You cannot stay in a selective sense of ignorance. Because if you don't know what's going on, how did you select not to know it? And I see that as a challenge to stay in our stories and find where your story is in that. And one of the key places for that is to go across generations and look at policy. And that's fundamental policy. As a white person, from constitutional law to case law, the law that allows us to be on campuses because they say we're protected people and they don't protect us, like Title IX, like the money that we get through scholarships. So Kendi is saying also, he's saying, for us to be in this conversation, we have to know what is driving it. And what is driving it is the way policy is constructed for self-interest. And so when we're in our classes, it's like everybody tells a story, and the stories I was telling were really constitutional and public law stories. And you don't have to name them that, you can get it out so that they get claimed to be that. But you have to know, if I'm going to be doing the work, I've got to be at least 2 or 3 steps ahead of knowing what are the contexts, what are the contexts, and what am I doing to promote the condition of racial fatigue, battle fatigue. So I think introducing that topic, and when you ask it, just to go to and research that topic and begin to say, so what? What does that mean to me?
So Pat, I don't want to interrupt you.
Go on.
Okay. I would suggest that the fundamental question that allies must ask, and it's just a simple one for me because I've been asking it. How could we allow so many innocent Black and brown people to be killed without a response, an overwhelming response from white America. It's been going on for decades. Black people have marched and cried and begged and pleaded. And yet it has gone on up until George Floyd that became so egregious that white people couldn't ignore it. But I'm just curious to know, how could that many people of color die in your presence? And we get the weak and anemic response that white people offered us, which made it even more possible for more people of color to die. So that question is a good place to start. And if you can figure that out, then you might know something about your humanity and where it exists.
I'd like to give two quick examples of what awareness is about. After World War II, you do not see in Germany a statue of Hitler or his generals. And in Germany, in their schooling, they learn about the Nazis, and it doesn't cause them necessarily to have a sense of shame, but they have awareness of what went in the past. Now compare that to the way we celebrate Southern generals in the South. Now think about that. These are people who were treasonous, who were against the Union, and in some cases they were against poor white people. And so you have two examples of one country embracing the knowledge of their formal days of oppression and others celebrating it. Secondly, the biggest problem amongst working class people is unemployment. And yet we have no safety net that helps people who are unemployed. White people end up being angry at Black people as if they had caused their unemployment. It's a colossal, amazing fantasy that we don't own most of the industries, and yet we are blamed for the unemployment. So you have two people, working class Blacks, working class whites, who are suffering from the same pain, which is the society has taken away their sense of worth. And yet it ends up being a racial discourse rather than an economic discourse. And those are the kinds of things we mean by becoming aware. The only way you can know about that is to take political economy seriously. It's not magical, it's not something from Mars, it's the kind of education you have. And white people have to understand that they're almost educated not to know who they are and the powers to be. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Just look at the fact that we don't think about the fact that the number one problem amongst working class people is unemployment. Yet we have no program of massive 10-year infrastructure, for example, that will keep people employed. And finally, almost all the other rich nations in the society have healthcare. We don't have healthcare. And in some cases, whites have been thought to believe that they don't want to have healthcare because somehow that would be helping Black people and brown people and not everyone. That's the kind of mumble jumble stuff that we're dealing with as a society. And then one more last statement, I'm sorry for taking so long. When Till was lynched, we saw it through Jet magazine and the pictures that were there. We have to be aware that with media, now if there was only 10 Black people killed, the way the media will find out about it almost instantly. So in some ways, there's almost a more immediacy to racism today than was the time for us. We would find out about Emmett Till being murdered a week or so after he was murdered. Today, you get it instantly, and the pictures are vivid. And that's why it's so critical that you find ways, especially if you're a Black person, that when you get that information and you feel the pain, you have to live a life that allows you not to take that stress to bed with you, because eventually it will kill you. Thank you for the time.
Thank you all so much for your contribution to that question. We have another question from Jasmine Brown, an academic advisor on the Statesboro campus. Her question is, what keeps you going in this fight when it appears as not much has changed over time? It is as if the players have changed, but not the game.
For me, it's not about the players specifically or the game. It's about my own resilience and my own essential belief in myself and my own commitment to justice. That is what makes it work for me. That is how I find some measure of peace in my life. The work is not outside of me, the work is in me, and it's how I define the experience. And so it's the work I must do. I accept that. I feel that I'm in alignment with what my work is on this earth for the time that I am here. So I don't spend a whole lot of time ruminating about what other people are or are not doing.
There are moments when rationally, I can't figure out why I have hope. Part of it, though, is the way my mother raised me. And so, in a sense, even after I experienced some really negative thing, it's just built into my system that I look for the light. I look for tomorrow. So in some ways, I would say to you, it's almost a little bit irrational. Because rationally speaking, there's so much pain around us, one has the right to be depressed. But I wall off depression by just simply having hope. In some cases, it's an irrational hope.
I think for myself, when I have been in conversation with others who talk about the despair and the, at times, losing hope for things to be different, for me, I reflect on my father, his friends, ancestors, all of those who sacrificed so much, and they weren't tired, that they kept going. And so for me, that has been my motivation when there are times where, you know, it seems as though it's happening over and over and over again. I reflect on just the struggles, especially during the civil rights movement, and they continued and they remained strong, and they were there to usher us into continuing that. And that's what gives me the strength when I reflect on everything that they went through and how they continued to fight for the liberties and the privileges that I have today, and that it's my duty to fight for those privileges for those coming behind me.
For me, it's to slow myself down and to recognize the caring for myself that I have to do if I'm going to be in any place or position of caring for others. And a part of my self-care would be to really breathe. Breathing is really important. And not only to breathe, but to reach out and really to find a place and people that I can connect with. And in some cases, that's just sitting with each other. Setting and connecting. It's a spiritual practice sometimes when I'm doing that, and a lot of folks would say I'm not a very religious person. I'm a very spiritual, to connect, to spiritually connect, to be silent and to listen to myself and to listen to others.
Thank you so much, everyone. This question is from Denise Rios. She asks, any suggestions, advice, or ideas, or even just a place to start on how faculty can create a sense of belonging?
During the course of a class, history of a class, there's a way in which the professor will somehow encounter every student. Now, if it's a super large class, 100, this doesn't apply, but in graduate school and seminars. And there'll be these moments when you have a chance to really listen to each student, and they will feel it, and they will feel valued, and then they'll start talking about that amongst themselves, and the communication will get deeper and deeper. But you have to just simply value every single kid who's in your class. Be happy that they're there. They had a choice to make, and they're in your class. And you, in those moments when you can give them feedback about that, and do those little extra things, they will sense your humanity, and they will reward you with their seriousness. That's hard to do at a super large class, I understand that. But in medium-sized and small classes, you can do it. I've had student after student to come back to me to say that because I showed I valued their presence, white students, Latino students, and so on, it gave them an extra boost for doing what they want to do.
Thank you. So our next question is, it's from Dr. Cottrell Michael. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. The question states, I'm the director at East Georgia State College, and I serve as the coordinator for African American males, for the African American Males Initiative Program. These are intelligent young men who have expressed concern about the recent killings of African American males in America. They are alert, but they are nervous. I have heard you say, journal, reflect, tell your story. Any other recommendations for them? I would like to pose this question to all panelists if time permits, but if not, Dr. Cross, Dr. Spencer, and Dr. Stewart, please respond.
I hate to repeat myself, but this may sound weird. You want to have a good relationship with a primary doctor. You need to have someone who's an expert about your body to give you feedback that whatever you're doing is making sense. And they will tell you if there's too much salt going on, if there's too much sweets going on, and so on. And think about it as not simply about race, but about lifestyle. That in a sense, do you exercise each day? Do you express love and affection and friendship to someone before the day is out? And do you take yourself seriously? Not in an ego trip, but do you understand that if you take the time to refine yourself, you will probably end up making a contribution. And I don't mean necessarily in the world, but helping another human being feel happy, helping another human being feel valued on that small level can be powerful.
Thank you very much. And I hear Dr. Cross and Dr. Spencer and I have been in these conversations for so many years. And when I hear that question, many years ago, I was in a cross-cultural mental health training down at the University of Miami. And what we started with were the people that we call the vulnerable insiders, the people that were most affected by oppression, and had them help us figure out how do we go about bringing other people that are your kin into the conversation, because they know better than anybody else. So what I'm proposing is that the young men, if you stick with them, looking at who has given them strength before in their lives that they belong to. They may not have remembered it, but what would a belonging, I just told you what a belonging experience was for me. So get them to start talking about who's been in their lives that gave them steps that they could take that they may not have ever been able to take. Because that's what we do. We walk to make our paths. It's literal, but we make a path for our life. And so I think if whatever your position is, that you can bring them together to recapture. I don't just want to say ancestry. I'm talking about other mothers, other grandmothers, and the grandfathers, men in the town. Who gave you, or did you not get it? Or what does it feel like to get it? Belonging means we're connected. And connections are, I'm going to take care of you, and you're going to take care of me, and we're going to take care of somebody else. And you can have all the theories and all the techniques, but it's that connecting people in a language that is organic. And I know it might be difficult for men, but men can get to that. And they can get to that because It's humanity made divine. And that inner spirit will come out. We just have to hear it and be sure we can see it. Can you see what picture? I say you got to get a 64 color box of crayons in order for you to see the light that they're showing you.
I guess I'm to repeat some of what's been said, but I think that it's the relationship and how we build a relationship, and that we take our cues from not what we make in our minds, but from the person that we're building relationship themselves. If we were to look and take our clues of what's going on and how to connect, that takes work. Building relationships is not something that, let's say, a 10-week program that you can do. And that's not minimizing programs,
No.
but you can start there. You can really start there. But take your cues from the people you're working.
So this next question was asked in a variety of ways. So rather than repeating the question, we're just going to ask one blanket question. As a white individual, how can I best support friends, colleagues, and students battling racial battle fatigue?
I think talking to other white people and colleagues and connecting there. It's a wonderful question. It really is. Working would, how do I want to put this? I'll just put it there. Being careful not to be a self-appointed ally. And at the same time, really recognizing that you really do want to connect and support friends and colleagues. I mentioned the concept of havens and harbors. Find yourself a haven, small group of people, and start to practice. And it's a wonderful way. You're not drifting out there alone. And you use those same kinds of caring and connecting that we talked about earlier in working with folks. It's hard work. There's not a check answer.
You have to show up. You have to show up, and I can't tell you which meetings. People have to see you there. You have to not do it alone. And by that I mean, if you can gather together with other white colleagues, at least one or two, so that you're not doing things alone.
Yeah.
And then let life flow. There's parts of the Black experience that's just fucking friendly, and just simply get involved with that. And then next thing you know, the people are going to see that you're sincere, that you're honest. And it takes time. So today you may say, I want to do something, but it takes time for you to do something. So my friend Michelle Fine has always been there, but she wasn't there. Well, I should say she's there now because it's a part of her life. But in a sense, it took some time. Race, from a white point of view, is like a brick wall. I mean, I want to repeat something, that most white people talk only to other white people. That's their world. And for the most part, that happens to Latinos and African Americans as well. But give yourself a break, take your time. You're not going to change life overnight. Show up, take classes, be in organizations, and eventually you will be rewarded by those who see you and are happy that you're present. It's very multiculturalism is fun, but you have to be there to enjoy it.
And I would add to all of the great points stated, to also, when you're engaging in these conversations with Black friends and Black colleagues, ask them if it's a good time for them to talk. because especially earlier this year, after the murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor, to name a few, many Black individuals felt incredibly overwhelmed. They felt as though their white friends and their white colleagues were constantly asking them, how are you? Or how can I help? And so make sure that you ask them, how are you doing? Because as I mentioned before, this was incredibly traumatic. And it felt as though you were overwhelmed over and over and over again, not to mention the pandemic of coronavirus. So just make sure that you ask people, your friends, colleagues, is right now a good time to talk? Or know that I'm there. And if you do want to talk about this, or talk about ways I can help, then let me know when it's the appropriate time.
All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us today. I just want to take another moment to say thank you to everyone on this panel. So Dr. Demoye Collet, thank you so much. Dr. Stewart, Ms. Thurman, Ms. Calaire, Ms. Wallace, Dr. Spencer, Dr. Cross, Dr. Williams-Johnson, to Valencia as well. Thank you so much for your support. To our IT support team, we just really appreciate each of you. Unfortunately, we did not have time to get to everyone's question, but we are collecting those questions. If you've identified yourself by name and you're a part of the Georgia Southern University community, we will provide immediate follow-up to you. I'll get those questions to each of the panelists. This was a really engaging and thoughtful conversation, and I really appreciated the opportunity to hear from such an esteemed group of panelists. I don't know if those of you who are on the call realize, but this is so much wisdom. These are national experts, and we're just so fortunate to have them here with us today. So thank you again to each of our panelists. The conversations don't end here. We're going to engage in a series of counseling sessions that move beyond today. They're going to go into October and November. Some of our panelists are actually going to serve as facilitators of 7 additional conversations for small groups. Specifically, Dr. Spencer, Ms. Calaire, and Dr. Stewart are going to help us move forward with those additional conversations. If you have an interest in being a part of those conversations, feel free to send me an email at tawanwilson@georgiasouthern.edu. We'll get some additional communication out to you all as a campus community about what those will look like and what that structure will be. But we will continue this. And we recognize there's so much work that needs to be done, and the Office of Inclusive Excellence is committed to helping our community move forward, right? And so thank you guys so much again for the opportunity. This will conclude today's session. Stay safe and be well.
Thank
Take
you.
care.